Well, hello everyone. Welcome again to What Matters Most, a podcast where we discuss the most important things in our life and reality. I'm honored and very happy to have with me Reb Adam, who's both a mentor, coach, and a spiritual guide for me. And well, I'll let him introduce himself to cover some of his specifics better. Welcome, Reb Adam.
Thank you for having me. I mean, that's a great introduction. My life is absolutely defined by coaching you. The star pinnacle. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and to share some wisdom, share some insights, have a great conversation, to organically see what happens. A little bit about me. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, what I like to call less than reform, in the sense that I had zero connection to anything in terms of religiosity, let alone spirituality. My father's been learning Kabbalah since I was 6. So it was in the house. I was very exposed. He, in a very covetedly way, kind of planted the seeds. So it makes a lot of sense of like who I am and what I'm doing today, seeing my upbringing. But I made all my own decisions, despite the seeds being planted. So after, a long spiritual journey, became an atheist at 13, didn't want my bar mitzvah, then agnostic, then I was in the New Age community for 5 years, ecstatic dance parties, yoga events, new moon events, anything and everything under the sun, while still learning Kabbalah in tandem, and then, just kind of being thrown into the secular relationship game and experiencing the difficulties of being on and off and on and off in a particular relationship and just having that drama. My father having been divorced 4 times, my mother 2 times. I didn't want to be statistics. I figured, let me ground myself in something. So I asked the Creator to bless me with the opportunity to learn about my own roots. And so within a couple of weeks of such requests, crying literally 2-3 hours a day for 2 weeks straight, asking for that guidance and clarity, I found myself in Israel, full ride, full trip, 3 meals a day under the roof in Or Samech, a yeshiva in Jerusalem. I've been here for the past 6.5 years. I was in yeshiva for 2 years. I joined the Ashlag Kollel here in Telstone, Kiryat Yarim in Israel for 2.5 years full-time, 10 hours a day. And for the past 2 years, I've also been, doing my best to learn in the mornings, and have had my coaching company, coaching wonderful leaders like yourself to integrate powerful and transformative mindsets, tools, both in mindfulness and meditation, according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, to be able to make the shifts for our inner redemption so that we can expedite the external redemption as well.
Thank you. That's a beautiful intro and short bio. Well, why did you choose coaching? What brought you into coaching and that feeling of wanting to help?
Great question. I've always been helping. People came up to me naturally as early as I can remember, 8, 9, 10 years old, asking for guidance and counsel. People told me I had this kind of sage aura about myself, and they felt comfortable. They felt like space was being held. And I had this narrative throughout all my years. I was like the big brother, father type character for all my friends in terms of advice giving. In some cases, for my older siblings and even my parents, they somehow felt comfortable asking me for advice, and I held space for them. And I was like, why am I the youngest of 4 and like giving counsel to my older siblings and parents? It should be the other way around. So my parents said, maybe you should become like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And that area was always of great interest to me, though it didn't seem to be enough of an interest for me to really avidly pursue that in a deep way, as far as college is concerned. So found myself, after learning in Kollel for the 2.5 years, yeshiva 2 years prior to that, I was coaching people for free on my Instagram. I did my social media. I had maybe 4,500, 5,000 followers sharing a nugget of wisdom a day. And I sat 2-3 hours a day just messaging people, like organically growing my page, and people would ask questions and I would just coach them at least through text for free. So my wife said, you should monetize what you know best. And so from there, I leveraged my existing following and opened up my coaching practice. And just to see like everything come full circle, like, whoa, it just makes perfect sense that I'm doing what I'm doing, just integrating everything. My psychological aptitude, my intuition, my wisdom, it all comes together. It's amazing.
There's no better way to naturally reach your shlichut, right? Your purpose in life. Or one of them. Than being driven into it like that.
Yes.
When it's completely natural, organic, you're not sort of hitting your head, banging your head against the wall, doing something that you really don't want to do, right? Yeah. So let me ask you the question. What is the most important thing in our life today, based on your opinion and your perspective and your wisdom?
It's a great question. What comes to mind, because I think there's different levels. It's just like a Kabbalistic joke, it's gam v'gam, this and that. And there's always different madrigot. There's different levels to the perspective of what the most important thing is. Meaning to say, the most important thing for me in this moment might be different than the next moment or tomorrow. But the common denominator is still the topic of redemption. And so,
what does it mean? What's the redemption?
Absolutely. So what is the redemption? Let's say for me in this moment, a redemption, which assumes that there is an exile. The exile, if we look at the model of consciousness that is the Torah, being enslaved in Egypt, Mitzrayim, which comes from the language of tsar being a pain and a constrictedness. So a constriction of consciousness, a constriction of one's expression of their essence, of one's shlichut, of one's purpose and mission in the world, that is a relative exile. So the redemption would be a greater expression of the self. Understandably, if everything starts from the top and migrate by it has to start with our consciousness, our beliefs, our mindset. So the redemption would be redeeming our beliefs, redeeming our mindsets, redeeming our thoughts in a healthy and psychological way so that we can get out of the constrictedness, one step at a time, one block at a time, one fear at a time, one doubt at a time, and step again and again into those mini redemptions to slowly but surely climb up the ladder. And that might look very different as one continues up the ladder.
How does one know that he or she is in the right path in the ladder? How do we know that we're not being, let's say, played by the ego, or that at every step we're sort of lying to ourselves for a different reality?
It's a great question. I don't think a person is able to know themselves. And I think that's the great value of mentorship. I'm coming from the lineage of Rav Ashlag, the Baal HaSulam. The Baal HaSulam was my Rebbe's Rebbe. And Baal HaSulam says quite explicitly, one cannot know where they actually are. Someone thinks they're in an elevation, but really they're going down. Someone thinks they're going down, and really it's an elevation. And then everything's upside down behind the veil of what we might think it to be. So someone who's been there, done that, someone who's already walked those rungs of the ladder and is on a other perspective, a higher perspective, is able to give that guidance. Otherwise, if we are to empower ourselves as best to our ability in terms of self-leadership, what would that look like? A great indicator would be our chayim, our grace, our felt sense, pleasantness, the goodness. I can think of many pivotal moments in my life where I felt this deep, intuitive knowing and sense of pleasure and goodness and drawing and desire towards a particular matter. For certainly seeing in hindsight, like, okay, that was it. And this is it now, and those revelations will come again in my experience. And so there is a felt sense because it's hard to really concretize, hence the need again, ideally, for that mentorship and guidance.
You could develop some kind of intuition as you go through that process in some sense. That's what you're implying.
Yeah.
So why is this important? Like at an individual level, I can understand, like, you're explaining that this is a process of growth, of spiritual sort of redemption, inner redemption. why at a collective level does this matter? Why is this the most important thing? Like, how does this sort of go in a priority level on top of global warming or Third World War or whatever other chaotic situation we're encountering in the world today?
It's a great question. So according to Kabbalah, it all starts within. We have such a principle in the New Age society as well, and really all mystic traditions being the principle of as above, so below, as within, so without. So if we were to focus on making those corrections within, the theory is that we would see that change externally as well. So too, when you consider the principle of the world as a mirror, and that what we see in the world is a reflection or projection of our own consciousness, whether it be for peace or it be for turmoil and war. And therefore, if there is war externally, I am to do my best to look internally and say, what is the warfare within? What negative aspects are battling my positive aspects and trying to shut it down? And how can I better redeem the positive qualities of myself for my best expression? Based on the principle that we are all one soul, in one integral system, a unified field of energy, which the Zohar uses the same language. It says that the unified soul, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is a unified field. It calls it a sadeh, and that we are all grasses in the field or trees in the field. So when you change one piece of a puzzle, objectively the entire puzzle, the entire painting is objectively different. And so too, the principle is the same here. If we change ourselves and experience those micro redemptions, let alone a personal redemption, so then we are bringing that energy of redemption into the collective. Just to prove this point in a little bit of Hebrew, chesed, the word chesed, loving kindness, splits up into chas, the first two letters. Chas is an affection or a pity. Let's say affection in this context. And the dalet is the fourth letter of the alphabet. The dalet alludes, according to Kabbalah, to the global soul, to the Shekhinah, because there's more technical sides of Kabbalah. There's 4 general levels: Chochmah, Bina, Tiferet, Malchut. Malchut is this divine presence, this global soul. So Chas Dalet, Chesed, loving kindness, can be translated as affection to the global soul. So when you are taking care of yourself and shedding a loving kindness to yourself, all the more so to others, it's not just to the one person, you're actually shining affection to the collective as well.
Thank you for that beautiful explanation. I never really heard it that clear, that well sort of structured in thought, and I appreciate that a lot from coming from your wisdom of many years. What comes to mind is really sort of like, in my path, this past year and a half, 2 years, I've really been going through a transformation in understanding sort of like what truth really means to me, in the sense of going from a more sort of scientifically based understanding of the world to a more sort of intuitive, spiritual, energetic, if you wish, like very much based in Kabbalah, to be said truthfully. And the question is really like, as you said, this is really kind of like theory. Like all this idea of like global redemption is been written, right? It's written in the liturgy, Jewish liturgy, for thousands of years, from the Gemara to all kinds of Kabbalistic texts and the Mishnah and whatnot. And I guess the question is really about sort of, how does this truth, first of all, we understand that the truth is not really well received globally, let's say. But how do we do to, or how is it going to be understood? Like, when is this truth going to be sort of revealed itself, right?
Truth is found between two opposites. So it's a great question because it's such a difficult thing to accomplish, being it's the solution to that which seems impossible, the paradoxical nature of balancing what we call in Kabbalah in terms of the 3 columns of the tree of life. It's balancing between right and left. Emet is connected to the sphere of Tiferet, which is a harmony, a balance, and is connected to Torah. So if we're talking about Torah being truth and how that's not well accepted or denied and so forth, I think similarly to what I mentioned prior, being the influence that one can bring to the collective by their own inner work, so too, if one in of themselves is connecting to that light of the Torah, which I would like to clarify according to the Zohar, is not just a book. It's the guiding light of consciousness that allows one to elevate. Torah comes from the language of or, which is light in Hebrew, and hora'ah, guidance. Literally the guiding light that leads one to their greatest selves, meaning if you are washing dishes for your spouse and you have the intention that you want to be giving to them and you want to step outside of yourself, you want to provide, you want to be in service, that is Torah. And that Torah, the wisdom and any of its caveats, is a means to the end being the refinement, elevation of self. So if we as individuals can connect to that truth, then certainly we can be ambassadors and spread it as a grassroots. And I think that's how it always has been in the most efficient, grounded, and organic way. Hence the language of grassroots. We are already rooted in there. So to just come into that remembrance of what our essence is, being in the Torah itself, and all these kind of abstract ideas that Kabbalah shares, so we can spread it as well. But it starts with us. Always starts with us.
Beautiful. You do bring this concept of duality, right? Of opposites. Can you tell us a little bit more about why life is so dual? Like, why are we living in such a life of opposites constantly? And where does that originate?
The original concept in Kabbalah, which is right off the bat in the Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life by the Arizal, is the principle of Ein Or Bli Kli. There is no light without a vessel. And so it seems that the Creator has built the system, the matrix of the universe, so to speak, in such a way that we're dealing with opposites in order to increase the value of the light. King Solomon says explicitly in a verse that the purpose and goodness, the efficiency of the light is found in the darkness. And so if Scripture is supposed to be a model of consciousness, so we have it right there, it's an explicit verse that says the darkness is a means to increase the importance and therefore the connection, the identification that we have with connecting to the light, which is that which emanates from Source itself. So we have these opposites in order to appreciate the oneness. I like to describe it as a matrix, really, in that reality is made up of ones and zeros, like the matrix code. The one is the one and only above, so it's the light that emanates from the Creator. The zero is the vessel, so reality is made up of light and vessel, zeros and ones. But the truth is behind the veil, because darkness is actually just a greater light that hasn't been revealed yet. So really the zero is also a one, because Ein Od Milvado, there's nothing other than him, it's just a one. So part of our job,
is also light.
The vessel is also light. And so the job is to remember that, to believe that, and to do the work to extract the spark, let's say, from the darkness, from the blockage, from the fears and the doubts and so forth. And then we transform that zero into a one. We're filling the halal, the void, the emptiness with the light. So really we reveal that the matrix is actually just the number one. It's just the oneness. There's no zero there. But that's for up to us to do so. Now, it's a bit technical, if I may. The notion of separation and the duality that we experience are in lower levels of consciousness, even if it can be high, meaning 4 general levels of consciousness, which are the spiritual worlds in Kabbalah. Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, from top to bottom. The bottom 3 worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya are called the worlds of separation. That is where we have duality. That is where the ego, which is often called the angel of death and the Satan and things of this nature, it's exactly that. It's evil. It's something that we are to rise above and to work against. But in the highest consciousness...
In this context, I guess just to be specific, in this context, you're explaining or you're referring to duality as sort of a seeming reality of separation.
Seeming reality of separation. But there is still a healthy grounding in that we are to discern what is not fitting and aligned for our best development and what is. But behind the veil in the highest state, it's all one, it's all good, it's all love. It's like the rosy glasses. But even in that state, assuming someone has reached that state and they're still embodied in this world and their feet are on the ground, they still have to discern. And they still have to help others who are in those lower states to discern as well. So there is a truth to it's all good and it's all one, but we have to have the healthy discernment here. We have to have healthy societies. Obviously, not everything should be totally out in the open and a free-for-all. We see that that's led to the destruction of societies many times over throughout history.
That's very powerful. Indeed. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling that. I guess like there's a lot of situations where one perceives this duality and believes in that difference across the line, let's say. If it's between people and differences between people, or if it's between opposites that happen naturally in nature, or the suffering that we may go on a day-to-day, right? Sometimes we don't perceive that. It's hard to perceive suffering as a vessel for growth, right? Especially when you're in that suffering or in that pain or in that, challenging emotion. What could you tell our listeners to do, to work on, to have some alleviation in those situations, a bit more awareness maybe?
The Torah is a refuah. First and foremost, to connect to the information, just to connect to the wisdom, because we are taught that we are what we eat. So depending on what one is consuming, just to make a deduction of what one is actually absorbing into their consciousness. If someone is in a worry and a stress and a fear and so forth, I think it would be wise to make an assessment of what they're actually involving themselves in. What could serve and support them to cut out? What could be added? In this case, I'm recommending explicitly, if one is curious and wants to explore the science of their own soul, and to learn Svarim v'Sofrim is the principles, the fundamental principles, the books and the holy people who wrote the books. Because when you're reading those words, even if it's a translation, let's say, of such masters who reached those levels where they were able to navigate through their fears and doubts in a very efficient way. They were able to crush the blockage, extract the sparks, and get into places of peace and joy and equanimity and so forth. So when we connect to their words, we are garmenting our soul with theirs. There becomes a soul-to-soul connection, nefesh to nefesh, says Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And so one is literally gaining spiritual armor and spiritual insights and capacity to rise above their blockage. Now that's the theoretical and the practice of the learning. Certainly I'm a huge advocate, because I think we are even more so in the generation of experience, is meditation. It's not just a stillness. It's not just a mindfulness. There are methods that are actually very active as opposed to silencing, where we make use of our visualization maximally in order to literally extract the spark of light. Meaning, if there's a fear, if there's a doubt, there's a challenge. By definition, there is a piece of goodness within it. It's a baggage that has richness within it. We just have to open the bag. If you're gifted a bag, you don't just throw it out in the garbage. You open it up and you see the treasures that are within. I can speak from that from experience again and again. I'm sure you can too, in terms of the redemptive power that is such a methodology. And I would say specifically Jewish and Kabbalistic meditation over the standard transcendental type, which allows us to be co-creators in a very tangible redemptive process, not just to sit and relax and to still the mind, which is also very important. That's part of the facilitation. So I'd recommend those to look up such, opportunities in learning.
Meditation methods.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting path to take. As another sort of motivating question for people listening in, what does life and reality look like after the final redemption?
Great question. from what I've heard from my Rebbe, it looks the same. And that the day-to-day is the same, the actions are the same, the processes of society, large in part, are the same. The difference being is that as a collective, we're going to be operating in a different state of consciousness. So it might look the same, relatively speaking, in the external, but the internal reality and therefore the experience of each individual and as a collective will be radically different. We will be able to step above the ego in a much easier way. We'll be able to serve and support the other and actually experience the bliss of the light that is being in service to the other. Because if we're all one soul, and all of our souls are infinite, and therefore infinitely important, because they're a literal piece of God, so to speak, then every person that I can serve is like serving the greatest of all time. What a great opportunity, what a schut, what a merit. But we don't believe that, and we don't feel that. So there'll be a greater revelation of that truth in that state of consciousness. And this concept of this messianic, this Mashiach consciousness that will be spread to the world is the revelation of the oneness. And the oneness is everything we've been speaking about, being that the blockers, the fear, the doubt, the challenges that we have both internally and externally are in of themselves actually the light. That is the redemptive Torah, that is the redemptive teaching, that is the redemptive understanding, that the challenge of the darkness is already the light. And so that'll be more prominent and more out there. As far as practical implications in terms of sacrifices and Beit HaMikdash, things like that, that's great too, because there is an understanding.
We'll see what comes.
Yes, but I think more importantly in our day-to-day is to understand the elevation of consciousness.
The impact. Sort of the impact in our collective with having the presence and clear belief and sight of Hashem's presence.
Yes.
May we get there in our time and speedily and soon.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Reb Adam. Do you have any parting words for us?
I wish everyone abundant blessing, success, and goodness in all their endeavors. And I highly recommend, if there's anything I could leave you with, is to indeed go on the journey, pick up at least one book and see how that does it for you. If I could give a recommendation, it would be Giving, The Essential Teachings of the Kabbalah by Aryeh Siegel, and Tapestry for the Soul, as translated by Yedida Cohen, would be my two biggest recommendations to just explore and get a taste for this understanding through this path.
Yeah, I definitely second the Tapestry for the Soul. That really did sort of engage me into this journey and was in itself pretty transformational. So thank God I'm here where I am now speaking to you, partly because of your recommendation of that book. So thank you again, Reb Adam, and wishing you a great Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.